Distinguished delegates, I would like to call this meeting to order. Distinguished delegates, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Yesterday, we opened Agenda Item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication for completion of first reading. Previously, you will recall that this item was considered during our informal session on 10th and 11th March 2021. At that time, interventions were heard from 19 parties and regional groups, with one additional written submission and 9 observers with 2 written submissions. Yesterday, we heard a further 4 interventions from regional groups on this item. I would like to remind you, now when we start, that if technical issues arise, please use the green question mark in the bottom right corner of a meeting home page to request technical assistance. Unfortunately, we were unable to complete the first reading of this item yesterday and ran out of time. Colleagues, I would like to remind you that we are on a very tight schedule and that our time together is limited. Before we begin, I would like to invite the Secretariat to provide some information on the organizational work for these sessions, followed by some logistical information on the use of our online meeting system. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day, good afternoon, good evening and good morning to all my colleagues out there. As you are here, you have successfully joined the session, but I wish to remind delegates to join all plenary sessions, you will always need to connect to the SBI homepage on the CBD website by clicking Join and selecting the session you wish to attend in the calendar, and then the type of connection you need for the session, whether it is speaker or viewer. Please do not save the interactive link into your browser, as plenaries and contact groups are different meetings. As you have been informed through the scenario note, plenary sessions will be recorded and streamed online. Statements submitted in writing will be posted online unless the Secretariat is informed otherwise. Delegates are recommended to use the online application to submit statements. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters if you can upload your statements in advance of your delivery. However, they will be posted on the website only after delivery. In case you are unable to upload your statements through the app, please send them to statements@cbd.int. In any case, statements, as well as any associated recommendations for text changes, must be posted within 12 hours of the closure of an agenda item if they are to be considered in the future work of the body on that item. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. All plenary sessions will last 3 hours per day and will be held from 7 to 10 a.m. Montreal time, with a 15-minute break approximately midway. Please note that plenary sessions will become active for you to connect 90 minutes before start time, and the Secretariat will provide technical training and testing 60 minutes before the start of the meeting. It is a good idea to, if you are going to speak that day, that you do test your system before the start of the meeting. Requests for the floor by parties will be heard for each agenda item. Statements by other governments, stakeholder groups, or other observers will also be heard as time allows. Statements on each agenda will be limited to 5 minutes for regions, 3 minutes for individual parties, 4 minutes for major groups, and 2 minutes for observers as time allows. If any speaker encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. Regarding the use of the online system, when the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the chair. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone and the status bar will turn red on your computer. Please wait a few seconds after the status bar turns red and then start speaking. In the event that a chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone, turning the status bar to red and enabling you to speak. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication, mainly regarding any need for technical support, and therefore to keep your remarks there short. This time for statements is limited. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you to manage your time, but please do not speed up your reading as it will be challenging for interpreters to follow you. Please note that towards the mid-session, the chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need to log off during this time. Finally, we remind you that a virtual display table is at your disposal to share publications, information materials, and events that relate to the issues being addressed by SUBSA-24 and SBI-3. Please click on the tab Virtual Display Table located on the right-hand side of the web portal of the SUBSA and SBI meetings. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. We will begin today by hearing the interventions from parties and then observers. I encourage you to keep your statement short and concise. As time for statements is limited, a clock is provided for you on the screen to help you to manage your time. Once again, I ask that you keep your interventions to a time limit while speaking slowly and clearly. Speakers are reminded to upload the full text of their statement following the instructions provided earlier. Please note that your key points should be read out in the room. Again, before I open the floor for interventions, due to the limited time we have, I would ask those parties and observers that delivered a statement on this item at the informal session to take the floor only in the event that you wish to add something to your previous intervention. In developing the CRP, all the comments and suggestions made in your statements, whether in March or today, will be considered carefully. If any speaker encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat and make alternative arrangements. Before I open the floor for interventions, I would like to acknowledge the fact that this agenda item covers several aspects that cut across the Convention and its two protocols. Because of limited time, we will address all the different sub-items together. However, I invite you to specify which sub-items your interventions are referring to. So, with this introduction, I will now open the floor for interventions by parties. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. And so I will take the first intervention from Samoa, followed by Ethiopia and then Malaysia. Samoa, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, greetings from Samoa. Samoa notes the proposed long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as contained in Annex 1. Samoa sees capacity building and improving technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer as a critical element for implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. However, we are not clear on the mechanism of support centers as proposed by the Secretariat of the CPD in the long-term strategic framework for capacity development and cannot support this item in its current form, specifically in relation to regional hubs. The framework for capacity building has a purpose that states it is to not duplicate processes and institutions. With this in mind, Samoa encourages utilizing and strengthening existing regional mechanisms where they exist. Within the Pacific region, a well-established mechanism exists for supporting capacity development. The Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, or SBI-3, is the regional intergovernmental organization with the mandate to promote cooperation on the protection and sustainable development of the region's environment, and to serve as the conduit for concerted environmental action at the regional level. Given the common objectives of SBI and the Secretariat of CPD, there has been a long-time cooperative arrangement between these entities on capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation, knowledge management, and communication. SBI is also the Pacific Regional Hub for Protected Areas and the CPD Regional Implementation Support Network for Protected Areas, the ECP-MEA Pacific Hub for Capacity Building related to multilateral environmental agreements, hosting the Pacific Climate Change Center, supporting and hosting regional and national environment data portals, operating the Pacific Regional Invasive Species Management Support Service, hosting the GPF Regional Node, as well as being the permanent secretariat for the Pacific Islands Roundtable for Nature Conservation and Protected Areas, which is a coalition of organizations within the region. We emphasize the need for a focus on a specific Pacific hub rather than a broader Asia-Pacific region, and the importance to value add and utilize existing regional mechanisms where they exist. As we continue to implement capacity development, as well as technical and scientific cooperation in the region, Samoa welcomes the support of partners for these efforts to continue, scale up, and expand across sectors. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Samoa. I will now continue with Ethiopia, followed by Malaysia and then Philippines. Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a statement made by Ethiopia on Agenda Item 7 regarding capacity development. Ethiopia acknowledges and recognizes the interlinkage between various initiatives to build capacity of parties in implementing CBD and post-2020 GBF. We further consider that capacity development is an important and instrumental tool and mechanism to implement the objectives and goals of CBD and post-2020 GBF. As a decision made by UN Summit on Biodiversity, Ethiopia supports strengthening capacity development activities, particularly in enhancing the long-term strategic framework for capacity development to support the implementation of post-2020 GBF. Furthermore, Ethiopia would like to emphasize the following issues. Capacity development action plans for the implementation of Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, capacity building initiative to support the effective implementation of Nagoya Protocol on ABS, put in place enabling environment by the parties and governments in order to promote capacity development at all levels, the integration of issues of post-2020 GBF in their policy and curricula of research and academic institutions, the development of guidance for the effective implementation of post-2020 GBF by parties and other governments, the establishment of global and regional support centers and organizations in order to enhance technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer among parties to support the implementation of post-2020 GBF. Finally, we would like to invite GF parties and other governments and relevant organizations to provide adequate financial, scientific, technical, and technological support to enable developing country parties and IPLCs in implementing capacity building programs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ethiopia. And I will now continue with Malaysia, followed by Philippines and Indonesia. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. It is Malaysia's view that the importance of this agenda cannot be understated. We acknowledge that capacity building, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication are all enabling elements to the full and effective implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Malaysia agrees that capacity building must be a continuous process that is both inclusive and catering to the needs of multiple stakeholders. To enhance the aforementioned elements, Malaysia is in support of greater multilateral and bilateral cooperation along the North-North and South-South axis. We believe that parties can mutually benefit from continuous knowledge exchange, especially in invasive alien species, synthetic biology, climate change, public health, and digital sequence information. Therefore, Malaysia requests the assistance of the Secretariat to facilitate and promote synergy and collaboration between parties for the successful implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. And I will now continue with the Philippines, followed by Indonesia and then Morocco. The Philippines, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Philippines and other similarly situated developing countries within and beyond the ASEAN are facing circumstances brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, where most of available resources at the national level are being directed more towards immediate response and recovery. We join other Asian member states that have emphasized the pressing need to revitalize economic and social stability, even as we fulfill our commitments under the CBD. That being said, the crucial role of biodiversity in addressing and overcoming the current health crisis and preventing future pandemics is nevertheless embedded and indeed highlighted in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, which recognizes that a return to business as usual is no longer an option, but if we are to advance to a more sustainable and resilient future. It is in this context of strengthening the application of nature as part of our solutions for pandemic recovery and prevention that institutionalize capacity development, interventions that are robust, coordinated, and delivered in a holistic and complementary manner are both necessary and urgent. These are in conjunction with our efforts to reach our biodiversity targets. For this to come into fruition, partnership and a strategic whole of society approach is our road forward. The Philippines supports the articulation in document CBD/CBI/3/7 of the pivotal role of the sub-regional and regional organizations in facilitating and strengthening international support for capacity building programs. While capacity building programs are effective at the local and national levels, we find that their implementation at the sub-regional and regional levels adds substantial value as organizations such as the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity provide a multiplier effect that benefits member states and partners around the globe. To end, enhancing opportunities and means for capacity building and technology transfer is important for developing countries not only to meet existing commitments and challenges, but also to create an enabling environment for the adoption and fulfillment of more ambitious biodiversity targets, now and more than ever. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, the Philippines. And I will now give the floor to Indonesia, followed by Morocco and then Colombia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, on this agenda item, Indonesia would like to convey its national development concerning a knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism. On this particular matter, Indonesia has established Biodiversity Clearinghouse Body on 2018 to monitor the effective implementation of Indonesia's clearinghouse mechanism. Despite to this unprecedented time, Indonesia continues its work to build a constructive system to optimize its function as supporting system to implement Indonesian biodiversity strategy and action plan, including to strengthen its function as information dissemination media and to monitor the effective implementation of its biodiversity management nationally and pursuant to the post-2020 GBF. Furthermore, Indonesia's development program will focus on and not limited to, first, enhancing the development of local biodiversity clearing body to ensure the mainstreaming of national central clearinghouse mechanism. Second, conducting a strong management of clearinghouse mechanism on biodiversity and finalize its protocol and guidelines on data and information management. And lastly, preparing a solid biodiversity information system that can further function as a data hub and able to provide information that could be accessed by public easily. Due to this progress, and in order to avoid redundancy and overlapping mechanism, Indonesia is comfortable to use its own tool. Nevertheless, Indonesia highly appreciates Secretariat's hard work commitment, and dedication in establishing Bioland 2. This tool is indeed a progressive innovation that assists many countries that's still working in establishing its clearinghouse mechanism. Finally, we look forward for a more progressive work of the Secretariat in developing this tool. Indonesia puts its high hope that the clearinghouse mechanism system development could be strengthened and will provide significant benefits for all members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. And before we continue, I would like to remind delegates to upload or send your statements ahead of your delivery. Thank you very much for your cooperation. So I will now continue with Morocco, followed by Colombia, and then Republic of Korea. Morocco, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is wonderful to see you again on this third day. Morocco takes note and supports the statement made yesterday on behalf of the African group. Morocco believes that the success in implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with the transformative change desired hinges on an investment that is commensurate with expectations for capacity building, technology transfer, and strategic communication. In this respect, it is also important to coordinate capacity development among all the biodiversity-related conventions. The 6 guiding principles of the long-term strategic framework for capacity building beyond 2020 are appropriate and provide an outline of the scope of work, focusing on self-assessment of countries' existing capacities and needs, on country ownership and commitment, on strategic and integrated approaches, and on monitoring, evaluation, and learning frameworks. Nevertheless, the part that addresses domestic and external resource mobilization requires further development, as we see it. Otherwise, the framework would remain good overall, but only in theory. Among the strategies to improve capacity building, Morocco would like to emphasize the importance of South and triangular cooperation for implementation of the Convention and its protocols. This cooperation must be based on exchange of scientific and technical expertise, on the establishment of regional nodes, networks, or centers of excellence. And it is all the more beneficial to the countries involved when there exists a space that facilitates collaboration. It is important to include capacity development in programs led by national institutions. It is possible to get some large private sector companies to participate in developing national capacities, but it is nonetheless a challenge from the point of view of small and medium enterprises, which themselves have need of capacity building. Morocco underscores the importance of the COP14 recommendation to the Executive Secretary on developing a comprehensive communication strategy in support of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Communication should go beyond awareness raising during international awareness days and periodic events. This is a long-term effort aimed at changing the behavior of organizations and individuals, reaching every sector of society. These efforts should rely greatly on civil society. Finally, Morocco supports the draft recommendation, particularly the paragraphs relating to rapid implementation of the components of the long-term strategic framework for capacity development. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Morocco. And I will now continue with Colombia, followed by Republic of Korea, and then the Maldives. Colombia, you have the floor.
Señora Presidenta. Colombia agradece.
Thank you. Madam Chair, we'd like to thank the Secretary for the preparation of this document, where we have seen there's a good balance between successful and relevant cases that have strengthened the Convention's technical and scientific cooperation as well as its identified weaknesses in operationalizing a strategy on this matter. This offers an excellent reference material to parties. The vision of transformative changes involves changing the cooperation approach, ensuring the mainstreaming of a form of cooperation that links up with sectors and also is in line with Article 20 CBD. We have the following comments on the draft recommendation and annexes on the strategic framework. Even if Annex 1 provides quite a fulsome and well-developed proposal, it could be complicated because of the asymmetric capacities of different regions. Annex 1 should take account of the capacities of the different regions in order to have a more effective technical and scientific cooperation agenda. On the informal advisory group now. Colombia agrees to the establishment of this group as long as it does not overlap with other initiatives, but should instead link up, for example, with the tasks of the expert group on indicators for the post-2020 framework. The terms of reference should clearly state the relationship between this IAG and the Global Centre. We need to have more clarity about this. Is it going to be a part of the centre? Is it going to support its work? Or is it going to actually ensure that there's not overlaps between the different institutional arrangements? Then the global centre and regional centres, we support a hybrid of options A and B. Under this scenario, the global centre would collaborate with a network of supporting regional centres and other relevant organisations, as long as we ensure its operations, funding and continuity over the long term. We also need to have clear definition of the centre's costs and funders, as well as mainstreaming all of this into the NB SAPs. So mainstreaming the capacity development components expense in the national financial plans into the NB SAPs, therefore. It is expected that the Global Centre will generate action plans for the post-2020 framework in a comprehensive way, responding to Target 18 on capacity building, and should also be linked to programmes such as IPBES or other relevant programmes. And these plans should be in step with parties' priorities on terms of capacity building. Thank you very much. The interpreter wishes to point out the sound was not good at times and it did cut out. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. And I will now continue with the Republic of Korea, followed by Maldives and then Japan. Republic of Korea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Capacity development and technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer are critical elements in implementing the Convention, the protocols, and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The Republic of Korea welcomes the draft long-term strategy framework for capacity development and the proposals to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation in support of post-2020 GBF, and hope that decisions on this will enable systematic support for the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. In order to support the implementation of the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 to 2020, as well as the Pyeongchang Roadmap, the Republic of Korea has funded the BioBridge Initiative, the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, the Sustainable Ocean Initiative, and the Biosafety Capacity Building Initiative. Achieving a high-level ambitions through the post-2020 GBF will require a more efficient and enhanced platform for the technical and scientific cooperation and programs for the capacity development. In this regard, we note the progress report on technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer, and believe that the lessons learned will greatly contribute to the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. The Republic of Korea will continue to support the initiatives for the technical and scientific cooperation and capacity development and look forward to engaging in further discussions on how to keep various networks and initiatives complementary and synergize them to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation and capacity development. Thank you.
Thank you, the Republic of Korea. And I will now give the floor to the Maldives, followed by Japan and then Uganda. Maldives, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Maldives will be speaking on document CBD/SBI-3/7. Capacity building, technology, and knowledge transfer are challenging issues in small island countries, especially in countries like the Maldives with dispersed communities separated by oceans. Our ability to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the ability to monitor the progress in implementation depends on our ability to develop the necessary capacities and the availability of technologies, not only within the governments, but also to the different stakeholders and communities. In this regard, we fully support the Caribbean seats and the Pacific seats on developing specific capacity building framework for the seats. Given our circumstances, a general capacity building framework may be difficult to achieve in our countries. Maldives also would like to bring to the attention the absorbing capacity of small island developing states, especially those countries with small populations. In these countries, the governments are small, number of staff are few, with overwhelmingly broad spectrum of responsibilities under one person. The private sectors and communities are tiny and small in scale. Maldives, many a times, it is not the lack of availability of technology or capacity development programs, but the lack of absorption capacity and the ability to sustain and maintain the transport technology or the knowledge and the developed capacity that is the problem. In view of these challenges, we need new and innovative mechanisms tailored for capacity and technology absorption specific to island countries, small countries, and would like to propose changes to paragraph 7 and 18 under draft COP decisions. We will submit our changes in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maldives. And I will now give the floor to Japan, followed by Uganda and Switzerland. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Building on our statement presented during the informal virtual session of the SBI-3 in March 2021, Japan would like to add a few points on the draft recommendation on CBD/SBI/3/7. Specifically, we request placing brackets on paragraph 30 with regard to references on JEF. We are aware of the options and institutional arrangements on CBD/SBI/3/info/16, but further discussions are needed to determine the best option for those arrangements, including identifying modalities and criteria for the establishment of the support centers, synergies between them and with other international agreements, and related funding strategies, as already pointed out by the EU. Moreover, according to the info document 16, the host agencies of the support centers...
Excuse me, Japan. Yes? Could you maybe slow down a little? Thank you.
According to the info document 16, the host agencies of the support centers are to provide significant administrative and financial support in any case. We therefore suggest to add brackets on paragraph 30 until we understand all the institutional and budgetary issues and after we reach agreement on the options or even the need for the support centers. We can also support the EU's suggestion to revise the draft text of paragraph 30 as their suggestion replaces requests by invites, taking into account the lack of clarity on the institutional and governance arrangements. However, should this go forward, we would also like to add the phrase "as appropriate" at the end of the paragraph. Lastly, after the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, We think that it is important for each party to base its NBSAPs on the framework for immediate actions. This is exactly what we learned from our experiences with the IG targets. We should also be aware of the scale gaps that exist between the global target and its implementation at local scales. This is why we need to break down the global target into each party's national target. To support such work, we believe that capacity building for NBSAPs is crucial following COP15. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Japan. And I will now give the floor to Uganda, followed by Switzerland and South Africa. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We wish to acknowledge and commend the co-chairs of the Open-Ended Working Group and the CBD Secretariat for the extensive effort in generating comprehensive documentation for this Agenda Item 7. The levels of ambition that we have set for ourselves to achieve transformative change require tools, approaches, institutional and governance arrangements that must be equally transformative. We therefore welcome and appreciate the set of discussion documents before us. Madam Chair, we wish to underscore the following issues. On the role of the Secretariat, Uganda wishes to see the CBD Secretariat maintain an active involvement in coordinating a harmonized approach in the delivery of the proposed capacity development tools. We see this active involvement as implying a commitment, which commitment we would like to see honored. We therefore wish to propose that this role be explicitly articulated in the draft recommendations on this agenda item. With regard to the issue of possible options for operational institutional mechanisms, we wish to propose a hybrid institutional framework that brings together the best of both worlds. In other words, a hybrid of option A and option B. Option A being Global Support Center and option B being regional, sub-regional support centers. Regarding the proposed informal advisory group for technical and scientific cooperation, we wish to propose that the mandate of this group be expanded to include providing technical advice on capacity building as well as knowledge management. This expanded role should therefore be elaborated in the proposed terms of reference for this group. On communication for the post-2020 framework, Uganda wishes to propose that consideration should be given to articulating a communication goal at a higher level of aggregation with a focus on the urgency of the biodiversity crisis and therefore the significance and relevance of the post-2020 framework. Thank you, Madam Chair. We look forward to further discussions of these issues in the contact group.
Thank you, Uganda. I now give the floor to Switzerland, followed by South Africa and Brazil. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, Switzerland recalls its comments made during the informal SBI meeting in March and would like to highlight the following. For Switzerland, capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, including technology transfer, knowledge management and communication, form an essential part of the means of implementation and will be instrumental for the successful implementation of the post-2020 framework. We recognize the importance to treat those topics as a package in order to develop synergies and avoid duplication of efforts. Madam Chair, we take note of the progress report on the technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer and believe important lessons for the post-2020 framework can be drawn from it. One of the findings of the progress report refers to the issue of fragmentation and lack of coordination of capacity development efforts and the inclusion of potential partners. However, Switzerland does not see the main limitations and challenges in the lack of the institutional mechanism. Thus, we have strong reservations towards the creation of yet another institutional mechanism, as it is currently proposed in the form of a new global technical and scientific cooperation support center. Several technology transfer initiatives and mechanisms, such as under the UNFCCC, the Technology Facilitation Mechanism under the Agenda 2030, and WIPO Green already exist. Before discussing the potential setup of a new institutional mechanism, we should focus on the potential for mainstreaming biodiversity considerations into existing mechanisms. Madam Chair, this said, we want to give assurance that we consider capacity development, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management and communication to be important and are in full support of the medium-term vision. This vision emphasizes that by 2030, governments and relevant non-government actors will have the required capacities to effectively and sustainably contribute to the achievement of the goals and targets of the post-2020 framework. For this, not only efforts of governments are required, but efforts of all stakeholders. We have provided our comments and proposed changes in writing. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I will now give the floor to South Africa, followed by Brazil and Mexico. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa supports the statement made on behalf of the African Group. We believe that capacity building is a cross-cutting issue, particularly for developing countries, to enhance implementation of the Convention and its protocols, and to ensure meaningful engagement in the processes such as technical and scientific cooperation to facilitate collaboration and cooperation amongst parties and relevant organizations. Capacity building framework must promote a more balanced approach where both public and private sectors have distinctive key roles to play for an effective and long-lasting cooperation on development and transfer of biodiversity-related technologies. Financial considerations, including identification of predictable funding sources for capacity building activities, should be considered during planning stage. Our view on knowledge management is that the document prepared should give rise to tangible decisions for the successful implementation of the post-2020 GPF. As experienced with the IP-based assessment and in paragraph 16 of this document, data gaps, knowledge generations, access, and representative case studies need to be addressed through capacity building and resource mobilization on the 4 pillars of knowledge management at regional, national, sub-regional, and local levels to ensure that there is full understanding, awareness, and ownership by all stakeholders on the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. In terms of the capacity building under the Nagoya Protocol, we have noted the limitation identified during the evaluation processes, and we support the recommendation for the revision of the strategic framework and also to ensure alignment with the post-20 GBF and the long-term strategic framework for capacity building beyond 2020. DSI-related capacity building remains a priority for the developing countries in terms of the specific capacity building priorities identified. It is crucial to align them with those identified in the March 2020 report of the ATEC on DSI to ensure coherent approach. We support the expansion of the representatives in the advisory committee and also recommend that it should be regionally balanced based on nominations submitted by the parties. We also welcome the development of the capacity building action plan for the biosafety protocol and its supplementary protocol, and also support the full and effective participation of IPLC in capacity building, subject to PIC or their involvement in approval, and that benefit arising from the use of such knowledge must be shared equitably. Finally, in terms of choosing the options for institutional mechanisms and modalities to enhance technical and scientific cooperation, we will be in favor of a hybrid option of B and C, and we have submitted our text suggestions that have been put together with our statement. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I will now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Mexico and then Canada. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As we had the chance to state previously, Brazil believes that the post-2020 GBF must deliver solid commitments to support capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer in developing countries. Therefore, the suggested recommendations in document CBD/3/7 should highlight the important role of adequate financial resources to support capacity building initiatives in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Brazil looks forward to further discussions on the Global Support Center as presented in Articles 27 and 28. We must make sure that the core functions of the Support Center are clearly aligned with Articles 16, 18, and 19 of the Convention. We also believe that all activities of the Global Support Center must be developed on a demand.
Excuse me, Brazil. Could you please slow down a little? Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Madam Chair. We also believe that all activities of the Global Support Center must be developed on a demand-driven basis in order to address the specific national circumstances and priorities of parties. Furthermore, we would like to request further clarification on the structure and mandate of the global and regional support centers. With reference to institutional arrangements to support capacity building, Brazil would like to express its concern that some activities proposed in paragraphs 18 and 32, such as the development of new indicators, could duplicate existing efforts. At the same time, the recommendations should acknowledge the relevant role of international cooperation to support national biodiversity information systems. Regarding the long-term strategic framework for capacity development, Brazil would like to suggest some amendments. The long-term high-level outcomes must include a substantial increase in capacity building initiatives and technology transfer for developing countries. In Section 4 on key strategies, Brazil believes a specific reference to North-South cooperation must be included in accordance with Articles 16, 18, and 19 of the Convention. In Section 5.a, we are not convinced of the benefit of establishing a new high-level committee, as we understand we should strengthen existing coordination frameworks. As regards the terms of reference of the informal advisory group, we would suggest adding a reference to Article 19 of the Convention on the handling of biotechnology and distribution of benefits. Regarding document SBI-3/9 on communication, Brazil would like to recall the mandate set out by COP Decision 14/26. Efforts to develop new communication strategies and activities for the post-2020 GBF must be based on a party-driven process. Therefore, we do not find it appropriate to include specific communication initiatives in paragraphs 2C and 2D that do not reflect an agreed vision of the communication priorities for the post-2020 GBF. And finally, regarding document SBI-3/18, Brazil submit written comments. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Brazil. I now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Canada, and then Argentina. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, as regards capacity development, Mexico is in agreement with the proposed long-term action plan. However, we need to define the platform to be used and take account of the relationship with other subjects. We agree that it should be a living document that can include specific actions once we have adopted the post-2020 framework. It would be important for the Secretariat to support parties to include this component within their NBSAPs. Turning now to governance and coordination mechanisms, subject to more detailed discussions on the proposals, we suggest that we should strengthen the existing mechanisms. On the other hand, we think that the call to reinforce synergies with other biodiversity-related conventions is a relevant one. Secondly, Mexico agrees that facilitation of technical and scientific operation requires a solid and explicit mandate from COP. We need to have an efficient governance mechanism that provides strategic vision and guidance, as well as the appropriate commitment in terms of financial and human resources to meet the requirements. In general terms, we agree with the proposals to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation in support of the post-2020 framework. Reviewing the options for institutional mechanisms and modalities, we believe that a combination between the global one-stop shop and regional centres would facilitate exchange between all parties. We take note of the inclusive process to review and renew technical and scientific cooperation programs, but point out that funding is needed for each mechanism that we set up. Turning now to the IAG on technical and scientific cooperation, we agree with the terms of reference and also agree on the importance of taking account of the consortium of scientific partners on biodiversity. Thirdly, it is important that the clearinghouse mechanism, the CHM, continues being improved and updated in line with the different elements of the post-2020 framework, including the knowledge management component, including traditional knowledge subject to access granted under free, prior, informed consent, and also the long-term strategic framework for capacity development and the mechanism to enhance planning, reporting, and review. The generation, management, and easy access to knowledge, ensuring cultural relevance, is something that is crucial for decision-making. Thus, it's important the Secretariat advises parties about implementation of this component. Finally, our delegation will be sending in specific suggestions to the draft recommendations in writing. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. I now give the floor to Canada, followed by Argentina and then Norway. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada notes that the views we shared at the informal SBI-3 session on Item 7 remain valid and have not changed. Canada wishes to provide a written submission with proposed textual changes which align with our previous views. Canada will focus its intervention at this formal session on Part C, given that we did not address this section during the informal session due to time limitation and the extensive scope of this agenda item. We have 4 components which aim at clarifying and strengthening the decision text. First, regarding paragraph 1 of the SBI recommendation, we note that some of the activities listed in the document CBD SBI-3/9 have sunset and do not require follow-up. In view of this, we think that it would be helpful if the recommendation could explicitly outline the activities that will be continued. Second, we are generally supportive of the Executive Secretary securing enough resources to support the range of communications activities needed for a global communication strategy. However, we are wondering what is meant by global communication strategy. It is not clear if it is the strategy to support the post-2020 global biodiversity framework or something else. We would appreciate if the Executive Secretary could clarify this aspect. Third, regarding the proposed COP decision found in paragraph 2D, we think that it is important for the Secretariat to also work in close collaboration with parties. In this context, we are wondering why the SIPA Informal Advisory Committee is not referenced in the decision. Finally, Canada is proposing an additional paragraph under the COP decision to request the Executive Secretary to submit a progress report on the communication activities at SBI-4. We will submit these changes in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I will now give the floor to Argentina, followed by Norway and then Peru. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta, y buenas tardes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. This agenda item deals with means of implementation that we need to set up in a fair way in order to ensure successful implementation of the future global framework. For this purpose, and in addition to the comments already made in the informal session, Argentina wishes to make the following recommendations. On document CBD/SBI/3/7, we think that it's necessary to make some changes to the body of the recommendation, Annexes 1 and 2. Firstly, we would like to know the reasons behind the need to change the concept of capacity building into capacity development. It seems to us that it's rather risky to make this change until we have a multilaterally agreed definition of this new term that can be applied to the CBD. Likewise, we will submit suggestions to make changes throughout the document on the proposals about scientific and technical cooperation related to priority activities that are nationally determined. Additionally, we recommend introducing clarifications as regards the different cooperation responsibilities for developing and developed countries as flows from the text of the Convention itself. Also, we are requesting to withdraw references to other governments in a position to do so. This is an expression that is not found in the CBD and would tend to dilute the commitments that flow from Article 18, 19 and 20. Turning now to document CBD/SBI/3/8. We highlight the need to focus this recommendation on strengthening the role of the clearinghouse mechanism in the management of knowledge, as mentioned by Mexico. In particular, we think that it's necessary to avoid duplication of structures. Thus, rather than creating new global networks, we suggest that we should focus on strengthening the existing tools. Finally, as regards CBD/SBI/3/9, we suggest that we should adjust the draft recommendation so that the Convention's communication strategy is guided by messages agreed by the parties in the third working group meeting and the COP. And of course, we will send in these detailed changes in writing. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. I now give the floor to Norway, followed by Peru, and then Ecuador. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We recognize the importance of capacity development in the post-2020 framework and the need for enhanced efforts within the existing institutional structure for capacity development. We support the suggestion to keep capacity development under review in connection with a midterm and full review of the Global Biodiversity Framework. In our view, a critical component of successful capacity development is to engage technical experts, experienced institutions, and ensure inclusive input from the scientific community. We underline that the CBD Secretariat should focus on compiling reports and an analysis of progress and make this available to support parties and relevant operating actors of capacity development. They do not have a mandate to work on specific implementation on the ground. We think this can be done with the use of existing institutions and mechanisms, and we are hesitant to establish new coordinating mechanisms under the Secretariat. In that regard, we note with concern that the suggested COP decision seems to suggest a number of activities to be conducted also by other institutions outside of the CBD. As much as we support cooperation and strengthening synergies, we need to be mindful that we do not move beyond our specific mandate. An alternative approach to the one presented in the draft decision on capacity development would be to focus our efforts on promoting and strengthening relevant actors such as IPES and others. Our experience is that capacity development is often more fruitful when initiated and driven by the participating institutions. Referring to the draft decision, we believe many of the paragraphs suggested are too prescriptive at this stage and that more work is needed in contact groups to identify the best. Considering that time available for contact groups is limited, we acknowledge that in-depth discussions on the long-term strategic framework for capacity development will be difficult. We would therefore recommend that the Secretariat initiate a peer review process following the SBI-3 to allow parties to provide detailed inputs on the way forward. We also underline the need for all requests to the GEF to be addressed under SBI item 7. We will, of course, submit our detailed input to the drafters' decision in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Norway. I now give the floor to Peru, followed by Ecuador. Peru, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peru would like to thank you for this document 3.7 on a draft long-term strategic framework for capacity development beyond 2020, aligned with the draft post-2020 GBF and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We welcome the Forest Ecosystem Restoration Initiative, BioBridge, Global Taxonomy Initiative, and the Peace and Biodiversity Dialogue Initiative, as well as capacity building on biosafety. We think that priority should be given to capacity development in the national focal points in terms of a systematic approach to information, data management, spatial planning, and gender mainstreaming. Likewise, self-directed e-learning, online courses, and webinars are very useful for parties. But we need to find mechanisms to replicate this in areas where access to internet is limited or does not exist. Also, we want to draw attention to implementation of certain activities that require availability of the appropriate resources and increased effectiveness in implementation towards significant integral holistic outcomes. Moreover, we need to have implementation of capacity development that needs to be monitored to avoid duplication of efforts. We agree that the theory of change be applied to capacity development, and there needs to be global and national priority criteria for capacity development within the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, and also implementation of the post-2020 GBF. In this context, we think that creating networks between the biodiversity initiatives and conventions, and especially the UNFCCC, and the relevant institutions and agencies will contribute to the process of achieving these goals and targets. We suggest that recommendations should focus on strengthening financial and technical support for parties that are developing countries or economies in transition, as well as for IPLCs. On the other hand, we think it is important to achieve higher participation of private businesses with significant local actions. So we think it's important to achieve higher participation of private businesses with significant local actions, promote mainstreaming of nature-based solutions, create innovative ways of sustainably using the components of biodiversity, including transparent and ethical approaches to strengthen implementation of the concept of nature's contributions to people, as well as mechanisms to implement indirect contributions, also monitoring and evaluation tools that highlight nature's crucial role in achieving human well-being. Thus, we urge recognition and support for the role played by science, technology, and innovation to support implementation of the goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF, fostering transformative change by 2050. Likewise, we wish to underline the importance of the key outcomes and messages from the virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. We also want to highlight the need to develop new and pilot solutions based on innovative technologies. And finally, we are attaching a grid to this statement with our technical clarifications in the text, the recommendation, and the draft decision. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That was extremely fast, but we had the text. Thank you.
Finally, on my list for parties, I have Ecuador. You have the floor. Ecuador, you have the floor. Is Ecuador online?
Thank you.
You have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good day to everyone. We'd like to thank the Secretariat's efforts in drawing up this document, and we appreciate the efforts to show capacity development for scientific and technical cooperation and technology transfer and the implementation mechanisms and communication about scientific and technical information on biodiversity. In this respect, Ecuador suggests that under A, when we're talking about capacity development, in particular under point 1, that we should replace adopt rather than saying take note of the long-term strategic framework, given the fact that the commitments under the national circumstances will represent a big challenge when it comes to implementation mechanisms to be used, in particular in the financial and technical area, to achieve the goals of the post 2020 GBF. Also in paragraph 2 of the same heading, when we're talking about the capacity plan for the Cartagena Protocol, we'd like to point out that in the text, after the word reference, we should then say for their consideration, taking account of national conditions. Also, at the end of the paragraph, we should say and offer the financial circumstances for this to be effected. We understand that this protocol needs a strong and constant technical development and capacity training so that we can pursue all of this. And we take note of the initiatives around the Nagoya Protocol. However, we highlight that there needs to be training on management and administration of scientific information that would allow us to better manage and understand access to genetic resources and their sequences for the effective implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, in particular for developing countries. And this has already been mentioned by other parties. And then under point 5 of the same heading, instead of saying urge, we should say invite. And then in 22 of the same part, we suggest that instead of saying urge, we should say encourage. And then finally, we reiterate the need to have a further strengthening of technological and scientific and financial cooperation for capacity development. And there needs to be robust North-South cooperation based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and Articles 18, 19 and 20 of the CBD Convention, complemented by triangular cooperation mechanisms and South-South cooperation. So we'd like to highlight the need to reinforce the regional centres and their interaction with the global network and the CHM so that we can have effective distribution, massive distribution of these capacity building opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ecuador. And I see no more requests from parties for the floor. And I would like to open the floor if any other governments would like to speak. No, I see no requests from other governments. I will now invite major group and organizations to speak. As was the case for parties, I will request those organizations that took the floor during our March informal meetings to refrain from doing so now, unless essential to bring new issues to our attention. Rest assured that the statements made in March are available to be taken into account by parties. So I would now like to open the floor first for interventions by representatives of the major groups of stakeholders. Each statement should not exceed 4 minutes. So I would now like to open the floor to intervention by representative major stakeholder groups. And first, on behalf of the IPLCs, I think it Anders Chinchauso, sorry, I don't pronounce it right, but IPLCs, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Alipunja Mashikuna. My name is Yolanda Teran from the Quichua Nation of Ecuador. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and the REMI BLAC. We would like to thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the various documents for the Agenda Item 7. At this time, we would like to keep our statement submitted last March and highlight the following comments. On capacity building, we would like to reiterate the importance of the full and effective participation of IPLCs, women and youth in capacity building. We remind the commitments to integrate the views and interests of IPLCs through education and participation in decision-making and development of policy and procedures, and to link capacity building in terms of education to the IP-based mandate on working with traditional knowledge and other knowledge systems. On technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer, we note the recognition of indigenous and traditional technologies in the proposals to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer, and emphasize that such activities and processes, including the operationalization of the functions of the Global Support Center for Technical and Scientific Cooperation, should be done with the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples. Madam Chair, we have specific text proposals for the annex on draft recommendations. However, due to the short time that I have, I will read only few of them. In paragraph 25, in the second line, after cooperation, we would like to add with experts from IPLCs and relevant organizations. In the paragraph 26, at the end of the paragraph, after organizations, we would like to add an IPLCs. In the paragraph F3, and in the second line, after subject to, we would like to add free, after prior, end. In the paragraph 32A, at the end of the paragraph, after organizations, we would like to add NIPLCs. We already submitted to the CBD Secretariat our text proposals for the sections A for paragraphs 2, 8, 11, 13, 14, and 17, and for the section B for paragraphs 22, 25, 26, 28, F2, and 3, and 38. We thank in advance the parties' support to our text proposals. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity.
Thank you, IPLCs. And on behalf of Women's Organization, NGO FARN, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. My name is Ana Ipangracio, and I am speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. When speaking of capacity development, we must appreciate the unique role and experiences of people across the world and recognize that biodiversity expertise takes many forms, including indigenous and local ecological knowledge, which must be recognized, protected, and respected if we want to safeguard healthy ecosystems and the world's biodiversity. The CBD must promote bottom-up strategies and transformative educational approaches so to empower these knowledge holders, especially women, as well as youth, and future generations in order to ensure that these initiatives meet the aims of the Convention. This demands gender and culturally appropriate measures and projects. For this, we make the following suggestions. Regarding the document CBD/SBI/3/7, we recommend that paras 5, 7, 18b, E and G, and para 28, B and D include references to women and youth groups alongside indigenous peoples and local communities as priority partner groups in the relevant activities. Paras 8, 11, and 18C should make explicit reference to the CBD Gender Plan of Action. Para 28B3 should make reference to free, prior, and informed consent regarding the access and use of indigenous and traditional knowledge. We also want to see dedicated funds be made available to promote capacity development and caution against projects being conditioned on the availability of funds. Regarding document CBD/SBI/3/7 we stress that the strategic framework must be a joint strategy with the UNFCCC and UNCCD frameworks. For the high-level outcomes, we propose an additional aim of GBF goals and targets are achieved. For the intermediate outcomes, we propose an additional box, reading, women and youth groups. For the foundational process, we propose an additional box, reading, gender responsiveness and transformative education. We also propose that Para 26F makes explicit reference to the aim of identifying women's needs and priorities. The Paras 29 and 31 mentions women, youth, and right holders groups. That Para 46 stresses the need for gender-responsive approaches, and that Para 59 has separate sub-paragraphs for indigenous peoples and local communities, women, and youth groups. Finally, states must consider and address the issue of internet connectivity, inhibiting some countries from accessing modules and courses on the biodiversity e-learning platform. We have also made this submission to the online portal and hope for party support to our recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, women. And on behalf of youth, it's Global Youth Biodiversity Network. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Global Youth Biodiversity Network believes that a lack of focus on non-state actors, including youth, women, indigenous people, and local communities, is a clear weakness in the proposed capacity development strategy. This is a problem as involvement of non-state actors in capacity development is a key aspect in ensuring the whole of society approach necessary to meet the goals and targets of the post-global biodiversity framework. We therefore propose the following text changes. We propose that in paragraphs 7, 18b, and 18d of the draft recommendation, as well as paragraphs 26a and 29f of the draft long-term strategic framework, there is a reference to relevant stakeholders, particularly youth, women, and indigenous people and local communities. In the draft recommendation CBD SBI-3/7, in paragraph 5 on enabling environments, to add insufficient funding after laws and incentives. After to promote and facilitate capacity development at various levels, to add in partnership with relevant stakeholders, including indigenous peoples and local communities, women, and youth. Paragraph 18e on the Capacity Development Forum should state that such a forum should include perspectives of IPLC's women and youth and have a proportional amount of participants from these groups. In the draft long-term strategic framework for capacity development, CBD SBI-3/7 at 1, the theory of change should include women and youth in the list of key stakeholders and their intermediate outcomes, as well as to make explicit under foundational process that lifelong learning programs includes formal, informal, and non-formal education. In paragraph 30, on integration of gender perspectives, a new subheading should be added, subheading E2, mentioning that intergenerational perspectives should be fully integrated into biodiversity capacity development efforts. Under section 4 on key strategies to improve capacity development, we would like to include two more strategies. First is to develop bottom-up strategies, while the second is to increase focus on education. In paragraph 34 on MBCAPs, it should be added that MBCAPs should include plans on youth engagement and capacity development, as well as intergenerational initiatives. In paragraph 63 on indicators, it should be added that capacity development indicators in the post-2020 monitoring framework should be relevant, disaggregated by age, sex, indigenous status, and other relevant groups. On the document SBI-3/9 on communications, paragraph 2D, to add the Global Youth Biodiversity Network to the list of communication partners. We hope parties will support our proposals. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. On behalf of CPD Alliance, I give the floor to ETC Group. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day to everybody. This statement is made on behalf of CPD Alliance. We are in a time where an unprecedented erosion of biological and cultural diversity stands in stark contrast with the rapid development of extreme technologies, from data-driven technologies to biotechnologies and Earth system manipulations. Examples include geoengineering and gene-drive organisms. In most cases, these technologies are brought to the market by large private companies in the absence of strong and transparent regulatory frameworks in order to pursue the increase of their profits rather than the public good. Yet, in reality, it is the practices, knowledge systems, and innovations of local and indigenous communities and peasants, especially women, that provide concrete and effective answers to biodiversity, climate, and food crises. We must emphasize our concern that the recommendation for decisions contained in document SBI-3/7 are strongly biased towards facilitating private sector interest and even speculative markets, with proposals such as matchmaking, joint ventures, and incubators, leaving states to merely establish enabling environments. At the same time, the draft decisions do not take into account important goals identified by parties and reflected in accompanying document AD2, where it is emphasized that the goals should include, for instance, to enable technology horizon scanning, assessment, monitoring, and judgment on the appropriate technologies, as well as to ensure prior informed consent of indigenous peoples and local communities. The draft decisions fail also to mention that the development and implementation of emerging technologies, including biotechnologies, artificial intelligence, use of big data, and blockchain, must be based on the precautionary approach and in line with objectives of the Convention, as proposed by the same document. The document AD2 also stresses that good technology governance means that technical and scientific cooperation actions need to be subject to prior evaluation to ensure they are in line with the aims of the CBD, the rights-based approach, and the precautionary approach. To summarize, the proposed decisions must include provisions to develop the capacity for technology horizon scanning, technology assessment, and monitoring, and the need to put technical cooperation in the context of precaution, participation, free prior informed consent, liability and redress, and the rights-based approach. They should also integrate the recognition and promotion of indigenous knowledge and technologies, including in particular indigenous women knowledge, as well as the mandate to pursue synergies and collaboration with networks, including civil society networks who carry technology horizon scanning and technology assessment. The CBD Alliance requests that these elements be integrated into the mandate and reflect in the composition of the informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation. We also emphasize that the role of carrying out and supporting technology horizon scanning, assessment, and monitoring be added to the core functions of the global and regional support centers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, CBD Alliance. And I will now open the floor for interventions from observers. Please note that you have only 2 minutes for your statements, and I will be quite tough and cut you off if you speak more than 2 minutes. So please be aware of time. So I will start on my list with GBIF. You have the floor, followed by IUCN.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm addressing the knowledge management component. This intervention is on behalf of a group of organizations who led a round table on biodiversity monitoring and data as part of the virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science, whose outcomes and recommendations are included in the information document substa/24/inf/28. A key message from this round table was the essential need for well-resourced and well-designed biodiversity monitoring and data systems at national level to enable generation of the information needed for implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is also an important component of the response to guiding question 3.2 from the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. Guidance and best practice from global networks such as GBIF and GEOBON will support this need. We therefore suggest additional text following paragraph 4 of the draft decision in document SBI-3/8 on knowledge management as follows. First, to take note of the outcomes and key messages of the forum mentioned earlier with reference to information document 28. And second, to invite parties, other governments and relevant organizations to establish well-resourced biodiversity observation networks and information facilities supported by data sharing policies, associated capacity building and guidance to underpin generation of the information needed to implement and track the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We've submitted this suggested wording in writing, and we would very much welcome support from parties for this addition. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I continue with the IUCN and then followed by IPLC PHCDO. IUCN, you have the floor. IUCN, if you raise your hand. No. IUCN, you have the floor. If you are connected.
Okay. Yes, Chair. Connected. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. As the long-term strategic framework for capacity development will depend on viable partnerships, commitments, and initiatives, and should capitalize on the investments already made in building regional knowledge centers, IUCN would like to suggest wording in the draft decision to welcome these efforts and to leverage the investments to date. I have just 3 suggestions to make, and we will submit the full suggestions in writing. In paragraph 12, it would be useful to mention some of these partnerships, such as Panorama, Solutions for a Healthy Planet Partnership, BEST, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services in European Overseas Territories, and the BioPharma program established with the support of the European Commission and the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. We'd also like to suggest perhaps a new para, perhaps 16 bis, which would invite support for the existing regional observatories established under BioPharma, as well as the reference information systems and the associated capacity development initiatives initiated under that program in support of the idea of regional knowledge centers. And finally, in para 27, right at the end of the paragraph, it would be suggested that we add, in addition to the other networks, the BioPharma regional observatories and reference information systems. Madam Chair, we note that several parties have invited or suggested this kind of synergy, and so IUCN would like to add its support for the elaboration of those existing efforts. And we invite parties, where possible, to support this idea in their own interventions And just to mention that we have uploaded the statement, including the suggested specific text amendments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ayusen. And I continue with IPLC, BHCDO, followed by Water and Environment. BHCDO, you have the floor. IPLC, BHCDO, are you connected? Yes, you have the floor.
Are you hearing me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Good morning from Antigua and Barbuda. And I'd like to add to Power 12, where we strengthen partnerships that can bring results. And I'm referring to the need for us at the local community level to produce case studies. How do we know that the investment is paying off? How do we know that we are having impacts? This can be done through production of case studies, but very few are coming from the ground. I'd like to pay special mention to the International Partnership for the Satamaya Initiative. This is a group that helps in documenting these case studies. They provide authorship trainings. They function as a mentor. And as a result, we here in Antigua, our local groups were able to put a case study together that's been published in the thematic review. I'd also like to mention groups like the CBD Women's Caucus. Within that network, there are so many skills. And I was able from Antigua to put together some videos on pollinators, case study on the Escazú, but they produced some graphics. They integrated graphics in the case studies. So it's not just words. It has an appeal. It impacted young people. It impacted even persons with disabilities because maybe they didn't understand the words, but the graphic brought the messages. So my appeal this morning is to continue to strengthen the partnerships, build the collaborations and the cooperation so that we can move to the goal of living in harmony with nature. I'd like to thank parties in the Caribbean, St. Lucia, Grenada, for the support that has been coming in. I'd like to thank Forest People's Program, Sweet Bio, for all the investment being made in the local community groups. And I'm asking more donors, more partners to come on board.
Please note the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I give the floor to Business, Water and Environment, and then NGO IUBS. Water and Environment, you have the floor.
You hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I am speaking on behalf of DHI Water and Environment, an organization from Malaysia that is currently leading the establishment of the Malaysian Platform for Business and Biodiversity. We are making our intervention on the draft long-term strategic framework for capacity development as detailed in Annex 1 of document CBD/SBI/3/7 and document CBD/SBI/3/7/Addendum 1. In principle, we are of the view that the draft strategic framework can guide both governmental and non-governmental actors, particularly the business and private sector communities, in developing capacity on biodiversity for and beyond the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, especially since several important elements of capacity development relevant to the private sector are included in the framework. Additionally, it also considers the capacity development needs of small and medium enterprises. Although this is the case, our main concern is the lack of a clear pathway for knowledge transfer and capacity development between governmental actors and non-governmental actors at the national level within the current draft framework, except in paragraph 50 of Addendum 1. We hope that this pathway or mechanism can be included in the framework to ensure transparent and accountable cooperation between both actors. Finally, we would like to propose that item G on reporting and review of the strategic framework as per page 18 of Addendum 1, which is currently under section 5, mechanisms of implementation, is promoted into a section by itself, in this case section 6. We believe that reporting and reviewing are an important element that ensures the success of the implementation of the strategic framework, thus needs to be separated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we have time for one more statement for observers. I'm sorry if I have to close the list, and that will be NGO IUBS. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a statement from the virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th Sustainability Science Conference. We would like to suggest 3 new paragraphs for the document number 7. On paragraph 20, this will be 20 bis, urges parties, other governments and relevant organizations to recognize and support the important role of science, technology and innovation in supporting implementation of the goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF and fostering transformative change towards the achievement of the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. And then 2 paragraphs after 23, 24 will be takes notes of the outcomes on key messages from the virtual sessions of the 5th Science Policy Forum. And 25th will be invites parties, other governments to develop new and pilot solutions based on innovative technologies embedded in local contexts to address also the Sustainable Development Goals while enhancing biodiversity protection and scale them up to national and regional levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm very sorry, I don't have time to take more interventions from observers. I need to close the agenda item now. Sorry for that. Delegates, thank you very much for sharing your views. I'm also, for the case of transparency, I'm very pleased to inform you that many parties have supported the statements by IPLCs, youth, women, and also IUCN through the chat box for your information. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our consideration of agenda item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. We've had a very rich discussion and some good suggestions. On many issues, I note major areas of convergence. However, we also have a range of views which require further discussion. I therefore suggest establishing a contact group on this agenda item and task the Tonka group to address the contentious issues in the elements of the draft recommendations contained in document SBI-3/7 on capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation. With the help of the Secretariat, I will also prepare CRPs on capacity building and development support for effective implementation of a Nagoya Protocol, knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism, and communication on the basis of the draft recommendations contained in documents SBI-3/16, SBI-3/8, and SBI-3/9, respectively. I ask for your usual spirit of collaboration and compromise so you can complete your mandate and deliver clean text for consideration of plenary. The contact group will be chaired by Professor Alfred Oteg Yeboah from Ghana and Mr. Hayo Hanstra from the Netherlands. In the event that one of the co-chairs encounters technical or other difficulties, Ms. Laura Bermudez from Colombia will step in as alternate. The contact group will hold its first meeting on Wednesday, May 19 from 12 p.m. to 15 p.m. Montreal Eastern Standard Time. So, colleagues, we will now take a 15-minute break. We will reconvene at 9 o'clock Montreal time. Please retain your connection during the break. There is no need to log off. And have a nice break. Distinguished delegates, welcome back. I hope you have enjoyed your break. Before we continue, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat. Judy, you have the floor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to remind all delegates to speak slowly and to upload or send their statements, because interpreters find it very difficult if you talk too fast. And if you still continue to talk fast after the chair has intervened, then the moderators might have to cut you off. So just please speak slowly. This online session makes it very difficult otherwise for interpretation. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Secretariat. Speak slowly, but please keep the time as well. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, I now invite you to consider next agenda item 9, on mechanism for reporting, assessment and review of implementation. Before we proceed with statements, kindly recall that this item was considered during our informal session on March 11, 2021. At that time, interventions were heard from 19 parties and regional groups and 6 observers, and with 2 additional written submissions. I now give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents on this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good day to everyone. At COP14, parties requested the development of options to enhance review mechanisms with a view to strengthening the implementation of the Convention. More specifically, the COP requested the SBI to contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework by complementing it with elements related to means to support and review implementation. This agenda item on reporting, assessment, and review aims to respond to this mandate, including linkages with planning and monitoring. Under this agenda item, the Secretariat has prepared the following documents: CBD/SBI/3/11, options to enhance planning, reporting, and review mechanisms with a view to strengthening the implementation of the Convention. And there's 3 addendum under this document: CBD/SBI/3/11/add1, national reporting under the Convention and its protocols; CBD/SBI/3/11/add2, proposed actions to enhance synergies and reporting to biodiversity-related conventions and the Rio Conventions; and CBD/SBI/3/11/add3/Rev1, further information and draft template for the submission of national commitments, contributions to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The document, SBI/3/11, and its addendum present an overall structure along with specific elements of a proposal for enhancing planning, monitoring, or review and reporting. This agenda item is also supported by a number of information documents which are available online. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And I now open for statements on agenda item 9. And again, before I open the floor for interventions, due to the limited time we have, I would ask those parties and observers that delivered a statement on this item at the informal session to take the floor only in the event that you wish to add something to your previous intervention. In developing the CRP, all the comments and suggestions made in your statements, whether in March or today, will be considered carefully. So I will start to give the floor to the regions. If they who will speak on behalf of the regions could raise their hand. I have been informed that it is only Portugal who will speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. So I give the floor to Portugal on behalf of EU and its member states. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The EU and its member states welcome document CBD's SBI-3/11 as a very good basis for significantly strengthening the implementation, monitoring and review mechanism under the Convention, which is crucial if we are to meet Convention's objectives and by 2050, the biodiversity vision. We consider a reinforced implementation mechanism indispensable to any outcome of CBD COP15 incoming. We are of the view that all parties must take action to implement the post-2020 GBF within 1 year from COP15 in order to ensure transparency, comparability, and accountability. On implementation, the EU and member states are of the position that national biodiversity NBSUPS remains the main instrument for the implementation of the Convention at national level, but it will need to be strengthened in order to effectively implement the new post-2020 GBF. We consider of great importance that, in line with Article 6 of the CBD, parties are encouraged to align their NBSUPS with the post-2020 GBF as soon as possible, ideally using a headline indicators-based guidance for the NBSUPS to provide a transparent and comparable national response to the goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF. On reporting, national reports should remain the core element for reviewing progress in implementation of all global goals and targets, and should include a standardized section relating to the monitoring framework and headline indicators to focus on progress of the implementation of the action targets. We support the proposal to have two main national reports in 2020 to 2030 timeline. On review, the EU member states proposed a two-track approach to the review of the post-2020 GBF, the review of ambition and the review of implementation. We consider it is necessary that parties within 1 year from COP15 communicate in a standardized way their ambitions to implement the goals and targets in the post-2020 GBFs through a transparent, comparable and reliable process, thereby allowing an assessment of collective ambition at regional and global level. Therefore, we ask the Executive Secretary to prepare modalities, example former intervals, for transmitting information on national commitments as contribution, as well as headline indicators-based guidance of the NPSUPs, so that those contributions allow for a review of the parties' aggregated ambitions. These two documents would be considered by the open-ended working group. The global ambition would be aggregated as part of the global gap analysis and captured in the global gap report prepared for COP15, which would subsequently be regularly updated. In order to review the progress of the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, the current reporting cycle of 4 to 5 years needs to be used effectively and timely to enhance the progress in implementation. Reports must be short and concise and can be based on a standardized template and available headline indicators to minimize reporting burden. It may be desirable to request parties to report on a subset of the headline indicators, not only in the national reports, but also ahead of COP16 and COP18. This is best decided after the OWG3. Furthermore, a global stocktake should be prepared for COP17 and COP17 and COP19. This global stocktake consists of a global data collection phase based on the analysis of national reports, global gap reports, gap analysis, and further scientific evidence as available. Thereby, it is assessed if further actions are needed to implement the post-2020 GBF to achieve the goals and targets and to allow for a ratcheting up. The global stocktake also should include a high-level political phase after the data collection phase. The EU and member states support the continuation of the open-handed forum on implementation and the voluntary peer review to enhance the understanding of implementation of the Convention at the level of individual parties. The online testing of the open-handed forum on implementation showed its usefulness, but also the need for further development. The voluntary peer review is a useful tool to provide parties with an in-depth
Portugal, sorry, please note the time.
Sorry. The EU and its member states also welcome and acknowledge the importance of non-state actors' actions and commitments that would be reported to the CBD. A whole-of-society approach is key to reaching the ambitious yet crucial vision of living in harmony with nature. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, on behalf of EU and its member states. I see no more requests from the regions, so I will continue with the interventions from parties. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated. The status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. So I will start by giving the floor to China, followed by Malaysia, and then Brazil. China, you have the floor.
谢主席，能听见吗？ Can you hear from me?
能听到吗？ Thank you, Chair. China appreciates the effort made by Secretariat in preparing detailed information. We also thank all parties and stakeholders for their sharing of views. Basing on the formal considerations, China here raises our concerns. First, China agrees that the draft text considers NAPSAP as a main tool for implementing the convention. China agrees with that. However, the follow-up text proposes tools such as national commitment and the national contribution, applying them as carriers for reporting national goals, to which China holds opposite opinions. China believes that all parties shall bring forward respective efforts to achieve global goals and corresponding national goals in their NAPSAP. Since it's already in line with Article 6, there's no need to establish a new one. China notes that the draft text has not clarified the relationship between NAPSAP and national commitment and contribution, making the entire system very complicated. Considering some parties find it difficult to update NAPSAP for reporting national goals shortly after the establishment of GBF, China suggests temporary arrangements. For those who are unable to submit national goals through NAPSAP, the national commitment form can be used to temporarily report national goals and later included in the updated NAPSAP. Subsequent updates of national goals shall all be carried out through NAPSAP. China here recommends the Secretariat to revise paragraph 4A of the draft conclusion of the SBI document CBD/SBI-3 and /11 and paragraph 1, 3, and 6. Second, China believes that it is necessary for all parties to learn from the implementation experience of Aichi goals and enhance mechanism of reporting, assessment, and review. In particular, it is necessary to strengthen the assessment of the implementation progress of the parties and the global goals, best practices, challenges faced, as well as potential solutions. It is necessary to prevent from proposing ambitious but unrealistic goals that exceed our abilities and repeating the mistakes made when implementing Aichi goals. China recommends the Secretariat to delete paragraph 5A of the decision. Third, China noticed the draft text requires considerable capacity and financial investment for parties in implementation, which might be a heavy burden. So China calls for provide all-round financial support for developing countries to implement the reporting, assessment, and review mechanism. In addition, China has specific considerations on the draft text tensional report template, national commitment template, and is willing to further exchange views with all parties at the contact group meeting. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Thank you, China. And I will continue with Malaysia, followed by Brazil, and then Cambodia. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, Malaysia would like to extend our appreciation for the support from the Secretariat, the United Nations Development Programme, and the Global Environment Facility for their assistance in the successful completion and submissions of the Malaysia's 6th National Report. The report was the first national report based on National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan. It is to be noted that many parties, including Malaysia, have MBSAPs that are in line with the IT biodiversity targets, but do not end in 2020. The Malaysia's policy on biological diversity is a document that is projected to last until 2025. While the review process is being currently undertaken, Malaysia requests flexibility in the next national reporting process and suggests for a time frame of 4 years after the successful drafting of a revised MBSAPs by all parties. Finally, we hope the Secretariat to consider other reporting timeframes of key multilateral environment agreements like UNFCCC, UNCCD, and FAO to avoid any inconsistencies. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. I now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Cambodia, and then Argentina. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again. As we had the chance to state previously, Brazil believes that the implementation of the post-2020 GBF must be based on improving the efficiency of existing reporting and assessment mechanisms, especially the NBSAPs and the national reports. Bearing that in mind, Brazil would like to express its deep concern on the proposals presented in Section 4 of document SBI-3/11 regarding the multidimensional approach. Brazil understands that requesting parties to submit national commitments as national contributions towards the post-2020 GBF and to update them in light of the GAP report falls out of the scope of Article 6 and 26 of the Convention and COP Decision 14/29. Proposals on national commitments and contributions are closely related to the implementation of the post-2020 GBF and therefore should be addressed within the third meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group, or COP15. We must be extremely cautious not to put forward a selective parallelism to the Paris Agreement, as this could pave the way for cherry-picking specific elements of the post-2020 GBF and undermine the balanced, realistic approach we are always striving to achieve. Furthermore, multilateral environmental agreements that have introduced the concept of national contributions, such as the Paris Agreement, have also provided solid transparency provisions, whereby developed country parties shall provide information on financial technology transfer and capacity building support to developing countries. On a similar note, national commitments have added significant complexity to national reporting exercises and are underpinned by robust financial support to developing countries to enable the preparation of national reports. In addition, any proposal on national contributions cannot disregard the crucial role of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Thus, from Brazil's perspective, all those implications will need to be considered before bringing forward the concept of national commitments within the CBD and the proposal of a global gap report. Finally, regarding national reporting, we must take into account the monitoring framework for the post-2020 GBF will pose additional challenges given the expected number of headline indicators. Hence, the suggested recommendations should focus on simplifying the reporting process and improving online submissions that can be easily updated. Likewise, we must not broaden the scope of reports to address issues that do not relate to the mandate of the Convention, as suggested in Section A of Annex 1. We look forward to discussing this topic during the contact group. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, once again.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to Cambodia, followed by Argentina and Morocco. Cambodia, you have the floor. Cambodia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Cambodia would like to maintain the content of our statement made during the informal session on March 11 under this agenda item 9 and would like to add as below. Cambodia supports suggested recommendation 8, 9, 12, 17, and 18J and L in the document CBD/SBI/3/11 and would like to add another additional recommendation in where as appropriate, establishing a public and non-public platform for promoting corporations and preference exchanges of knowledge management products for effective and comprehensive national reporting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. I continue to give the floor to Argentina, followed by Morocco and then Colombia. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Achieving the Kunming targets will require three things: implementation, and more implementation of the CBD. Given this, Argentina reiterates its serious reservations about the documentation prepared under this agenda item. Document CBD/SBI/3/11 overshoots what has been requested of the parties, and it contains proposals that move far away from the legal scope of the convention. Its adoption could bring about an unreasonable workload, in particular for developing countries. Given this, we will submit substantial suggested modifications, and we will summarise them in the following 4 points. Firstly, the introductory part of the recommendation should reflect on the lessons learnt about implementation. So we suggest that we should refer to the financial, human and technical limitations on implementing the convention. Also recall the need to have a balanced implementation of the three objectives and reaffirm the commitments of developed countries found in Articles 16, 20 and 21 of the Convention. Secondly, we consider that the inclusion of national commitments overlaps with national strategies, and these national strategies are widely recognised as the main tool for implementing the Convention. And so this goes beyond what is required of parties under Article 6A of the CBD. Thus, Argentina does not believe that it's appropriate to include this in the implementation mechanism. Thirdly, tasking the convention with the production of global assessments or gap reports seems to exceed the scope established in Article 23 of the treaty, as regards implementation. So, in fact, COP's function should be to make adjustments in light of the review of information submitted by parties under Article 26, where there is no reference to global implementation of the Convention, but rather national implementation. Fourthly, coming on to the obligations derived from the treaty, Argentina maintains that the country-by-country peer review should remain on a voluntary basis. Delegates, we have to avoid the temptation of creating implementation mechanisms that are not underpinned by the text of the Convention. The consequences of going down this path will be negative and would lead to legal uncertainty and poor outcomes. Thus, analysing this agenda item requires bearing in mind that the true challenge does not lie in submitting more reports or assessments or reviews. What we need to attain the Kunming targets, as we said at the beginning, is implementation, and more implementation of the CBD. And of course, we'll actively participate in the contact group and the discussions on this subject, also with the third working group. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. I now give the floor to Morocco, followed by Colombia and then UK. Morocco, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morocco believes that the strategies remain the most fundamental instrument for implementing the Convention at the national level, and that The national reports are the principal tools for monitoring and review of the implementation of the Convention and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The success of an enhanced mechanism for planning, reporting, and review depends, firstly, on the updating of the NBSAPs and their alignment with the new Global Biodiversity Framework in accordance with the common guidelines, followed by a national monitoring system based on a limited number of feasible and globally agreed headline indicators under the post-2020 framework. This also involves developing modalities for reporting and review, including an online standard template for the 7th national reports. The need to promote mutual learning and exchange of experiences flows naturally from these proposals. Further, Morocco underscores the importance of guaranteeing the financial and technical resources needed by developing countries to support the new planning and reporting cycles. In order to optimize resource use at the national level, it is necessary to coordinate between the national biodiversity planning, reporting, and review process and other relevant processes, particularly those relating to the implementation of the National Sustainable Development Strategy under the Agenda 2030. The timelines and frequency of reporting should take into account the time needed to revise the NBSAPs, as well as the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the calendar of events. As a result, the deadline for the 7th national report could be set as a minimum of 3 years after the adoption of the post-2020 framework. The proposal to define national commitments to achieving the global targets requires more detail and discussion and should remain voluntary in nature, thus on the country's own initiative, as was the case with the preceding version. If this proposal has been made in the spirit of the nationally determined contributions under the Convention on Climate Change, then national implementation remains an immense challenge, one of mobilizing and identifying the contributions of each stakeholder. This would require realistic deadlines,
Thank you, Morocco. And I will now continue with Colombia, followed by UK, and then Norway. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In this process, we should continue building on what has been already built in the CBD. We see with concern that the proposal in document SBI-3/11 gives more weight to national commitments than to NBSAPs. While this should be the principal element guiding implementation and should also be the central piece in the gap analysis and global stocktakes, together with the national reports. On the party-led peer review processes, we suggest to consider innovative and non-punitive mechanisms, such as the establishment of a facilitative experts roster under the SBI, which can review and advise parties on implementation gaps at the request of interested parties. Other option could be the replication of the reporting model under the high-level political forum on sustainable development, in which specific SDGs are chosen to be reported on a given year. In any case, the required technical and financial means of implementation to support developing countries in the overall planning, monitoring, and reporting cycle must be available and predictable when requested. With respect to the gap analysis on the global stocktake, we believe that the Secretariat should be in charge of drafting these assessments, which must be reviewed afterwards by the CUP with the SBI support. Regarding the draft recommendation, we have several text proposals, but will only refer here to some of them in the interest of time. We request the following changes. Replace the text welcomes with takes note in paragraph 2 of the SBI recommendation. Replace the text national commitments with the text NBSAPs in paragraphs 4A, 4B, 4F, and 5 of the SBI recommendation, and in paragraphs 1, 5A, 5B, 6, 7, and 18C of the COP decision. Replace the text encourage with requests in paragraph 5 of the SBI recommendation. And finally, include in paragraph 5B of the COP decision, right after Global Biodiversity Outlook, the text, the IPBES assessments. Finally, we will provide more comments to the draft recommendation in writing to the Secretariat. And with that, I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. I will now give the floor to UK, followed by Norway and then Switzerland. UK, you have the floor.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. We outlined in our previous statements our views on planning, reporting, and review mechanisms. There are a number of elements related to these key mechanisms that will need to be adopted at COP15, and they should be prioritized in our discussions in the contact group. And we recommend that they are considered in the following order. First, on planning, the development of a common approach for communicating national ambitions in relation to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This could be included in revised guidance on NBSAPs. In our view, national ambitions could include national targets, commitments, contributions, and actions. Secondly, when it comes to review, two elements need to be addressed. First, how we collate and analyze parties' ambitions so that we can understand and respond to any gaps in collective ambition. And secondly, how to strengthen the implementation review, including the requirements and contents of a global stocktake report or further edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook. Finally, on reporting, a streamlined approach to the 7th and 8th national reports that provides the information from parties necessary for the implementation review, including how indicators will be used in the reporting process. We need to recognize that we have limited time and other elements of the planning, reporting, and review mechanisms can be further developed after COP15. In line with our comments here and with our previous statements, we will submit in writing changes to the draft decision. We'll also submit our proposals on the simplified versions of a template of the 7th national report and a common approach for communicating national ambitions in relation to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Finally, we would like to draw your attention to the forthcoming information document CBD/SBI/3/INF/37, which contains a summary of discussions at the informal workshops on planning and review mechanisms that the UK convened together with the Government of Norway, with the support of the UNEP WCMC, and with participation of 26 CBD parties. The overview of the issues discussed during the workshops is a useful contribution for our discussions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UK. And I now close the list for parties. I give the floor to Norway and then Switzerland, and then the list is closed. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the discussion on how to strengthen mechanisms for planning, reporting, and review at SBI-3. However, it is the open-ended working group under the guidance of co-chairs that needs to lead and conclude the work on this item. In that regard, the key outcome of SBI-3 on this agenda item should be the chair's report that is to be forwarded to the co-chairs of the open-ended working group. Discussions on different elements such as NBSAPs, national reports, global reviews, and stock takes, and how they're connected to one another is complicated, but crucial if we are to strengthen our current implementation structures. Contact groups should focus on identifying convergence around these elements, providing tangible advice to the co-chairs to take on board when drafting the framework to be discussed at the third meeting of the open-ended working group. In light of our decision to postpone adoption of L documents for SBI until a physical meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group, or the COP, the suggested SBI recommendations and COP recommendations from SBI needs to be drastically changed and cannot be used as a basis for negotiation. The main elements of planning, reporting, and review systems will be negotiated and further developed by parties at the Open-Ended Working Group 3. The SBI recommendations should therefore be short and concise, establishing only that content of the enhanced review mechanisms will follow as an annex to be developed and adopted at COP. This will avoid prejudging the outcomes of the Open-Ended Working Group. We will submit text proposals reflecting this approach. We also reiterate further concerns about the content presented in the suggested COP decision. The mandate from COP14 specifically says that the strengthened implementation structure needs to build on existing instruments. Yet we see new instruments such as the national commitments introduced. The recommendation is not logically consistent and introduces elements that undermine articles of the Convention relating to MBSAPs and fails to take into account reporting burdens and that parties have different capacities. Much work is needed to further refine and strengthen mechanisms for planning, reporting, and review, and we stand ready to engage in these discussions at SBI-3. Norway remains committed to contribute to progress in the development of an enhanced implementation structure to guide the implementation of the Convention and the new global biodiversity framework. Lastly, we refer to the recently posted INF document 37 that sums up the discussion in workshops under a collaboration between the UK and Norway, facilitated by UNEP WCMC. These workshops had participation from 26 parties from all regions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. And I see some more parties on my list. Well, I continue with Switzerland, followed by Uganda and Peru. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switzerland recalls its comments made during the informal SBI meeting in March. We take note of the draft recommendations contained in document CBD/SBI/3/11, including its addenda 1, 2, and 3. Like several other delegations, we are not happy with the document and have several comments, both from a process and a content point of view. With regard to the process, as the planning, monitoring, reporting, review mechanism will be a cornerstone of the global biodiversity framework, Switzerland expects that we will further discuss and agree on a reporting and review mechanism at Open-Ended Working Group 3. The draft recommendations need to be amended accordingly. The best way forward is probably to reflect all the proposals in a chair's report, which is to be sent as input to the Open-Ended Working Group 3, and not in a decision that would be formally adopted only after Open-Ended Working Group 3. With regard to the content, Switzerland underlines the importance of the following points. Switzerland supports a robust mechanism for reporting and review, which should create confidence and transparency with regard to implementation successes and challenges, create assurance that all parties act in an appropriate manner, allow detecting problems and challenges with regard to implementation, allow learning from each other, and help and stimulate improvement of action. In our view, the mechanism for reporting and review should contain the following elements: an updated and aligned NBSAP, including contributions to the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework by other MEAs, regular reports of the implementation by parties every 4 years, using headline indicators based on a template, use of an integrated, modular online tool for reporting, such as DART, compiling the results, achieving in different processes, relevant MEAs ratified by parties, allowing a comprehensive assessment of the results, achieving and implementing the post-2020 GBF without increasing the reporting burden for parties. The national reports should be reviewed by experts or peers to establish lessons learned. These results should be discussed in a virtual multilateral setting to take advantage of the lessons learned. The result of the national report should be aggregated to an assessment on the global level, presented and discussed during a high-level global stocktake in 2026 and 2030. Switzerland does not support the concept of new national commitments, as this would distract from the existing well-established tool of the NBSAPs and create an additional reporting burden. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I now give the floor to Uganda, followed by Peru. Uganda, you have the floor.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning to you there, and good afternoon and good evening to all the participants. Uganda extends its appreciation to the CBD upon the support provided towards the development of the 6 national reports and the NBSAPs. We also recognize the importance of implementing the key priorities of the post-2020 GBF and hence the need to have a robust monitoring, reporting and review mechanism, coupled with a ratchet mechanism in order to ensure that actions are adopted to attain change that is required. We acknowledge the meeting document CBD/SBI-3/11 and recommend the following. Establish an effective, comprehensive and cyclo implementation mechanism. Adopt a ratchet mechanism informed by science to ensure that 2050 vision is achieved. Include business plans and commitments on nature in national commitments. Strengthen and ensure enforcement of laws and regulations. Pursue an integrated approach to delivering the objective of the Rio Conventions. These are CBD, UNFCCC, and UNCCD. And then finally, enable meaningful and constructive business contributions into the framework implementation. Thank you, Madam Chair, and we look forward to the contact group meeting.
Thank you, Uganda. And finally, on my list of parties, I have Peru. You have the floor.
Can you hear me? Yes. You can hear me, Madam Chair? Just a moment. Can you still hear me, Madam Chair? Thank you, Madam Chair. Our delegation considers that the guidelines for improving the planning, monitoring, review and reporting mechanism needs to be a transparent and agile mechanism that's easy to access for implementation so that we can have access to information from the national reports for those who are interested amongst the different parties. On the other hand, we'd like to highlight the urgency to have set up targets so that we can adopt and introduce this at different levels and help us with effective monitoring with clear, measurable indicators that can be used by the parties for the post-2020 GBF so that we can then have a more effective and coherent review of implementation. We consider that's important that the process of improvement for the planning and monitoring, review and reporting process should increase efforts so there's better participation of the subnational and local levels and representatives of IPLCs, as well as the academic sector, the research sector and private sector. The proposals and the options for enhancing this type of planning mechanism and reporting review mechanism, we think, means that it's relevant to increase transparency and more responsibility with implementation, reduce to a minimum the reporting burden, and allow us to be able to take action. We also think it's necessary to improve synergies for submitting reports for all the different biodiversity-related conventions, such as the Rio Convention and the SDGs. Moreover, it's urgent to find simplified mechanisms for monitoring decisions. Finally, we think it's important to maintain the peer-by-peer review so that we can continue to strengthen this process, and that will allow us to attain the objectives of the Convention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peru. And I also see South Africa on my list. I take South Africa. I would also like to mention that Cuba has tried to have internet connectivity problems, but they have submitted their statement. They wanted to make a statement, but it has been submitted, so please look at that. South Africa, I give you the floor as a very last speaker on the parties today. Thank you. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair, because of the time and most of our interventions have been alluded to by most of the developing countries, we just send our support to Brazil, to Argentina, to Colombia, to Uganda, to Morocco, and all the rest of other developing countries because they have covered most of our concerns. Most of our concerns mostly on the availability of the means of implementation to enhance planning, to enhance implementation, and to enhance reporting, particularly by developing countries. We really would request that there are adequate and predictable, timely means of implementation. We have read in the documents that are made available for the Subsidiary meeting that in the review that was made, it was alluded to the fact that the targets that are set by the parties were not commensurate or adding collectively to achieve the global targets. And based on that, we in South Africa are suggesting that when national targets are set, there should be a preliminary global stocktake to ensure that they are added and they collectively add to the global targets and are commensurate to the targets that have been agreed upon in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We also are not in support of the national commitments because we believe that is an additional layer to the already existing national targets, which we set for our NBSAP. And we still believe that the NBSAP is the key implementation tool for the convention. And therefore, to strengthen the NBSAP process, we need to focus on setting up national targets that are aligned with global targets and which are commensurate and collectively add to global targets. And if we do that and we make sure that right in the beginning of the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, right in the beginning, we undertake a stocktake to see whether the national targets that are submitted by the parties are equivalent or collectively add to global targets and are commensurate with the global targets. So we'll enhance and strengthen our implementation and strengthen our planning process if we ensure that that global stocktake is done right at the beginning and do away with additional layers such as the national commitments, because we already cover that.
Sorry, South Africa. The time is running out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your statement.
Thank you very much, madam. We'll submit our statement.
Thank you, South Africa. And colleagues, that ends my list of parties. I would like to see if any other government would like to speak. No? Dear delegates, we are really running out of time. And as you understand, I would like to complete agenda item 9 today in order to be able to establish a contact group. Therefore, we will not have time to take, I think I can take a few of our major stakeholders. Unfortunately, I have no time to take more. Oh, sorry, one more party asked for the floor. Yeah, okay. Togo, I give you the floor. Please be brief. Togo, you have the floor.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Togo takes note of the elements suggested for a draft recommendation in 311 and would like to speak to the idea of elaborating NBSEPs for a better implementation of the convention and the national reports. This is a way to increase capacity, and this is why Togo supports number 17 in order to organize financing. And we hope that it will be done in the desired time frame and in an accelerated fashion. We need to have the means to move ahead with this process and to strengthen our infrastructure, our capacities. Togo, as others, is concerned with the idea of commitments and contributions on a national level. And so would like to speak to the commitments as there are already commitments under ODA and also in the framework of the UNFCCC. We will send in our statement in writing, and we thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Togo. And as said before, we are running out of time. I'm very sorry, I apologize. We don't have much time more for statements from observers. I will then give the floor to two of our major stakeholders, IPLCs and youth, and then I need to close. So I first give the floor to IPLC for speaking on behalf of IPLCs. You have the floor. And please be brief. IPLC, are you connected? Otherwise, we can start with youth and come back to IPLC. Youth, if you can speak, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And please be brief.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We all agree that we need a whole of society approach to meet the goals and targets of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is because we know that the task ahead is so big and important that if we need to succeed, we need to have all sectors of society on board in its implementation, including the non-state actors. It is important that this principle is reflected in all parts of reporting, assessing, and reviewing implementation. We believe this is unfortunately not sufficient done in the current draft recommendation, i.e. the document SBI-3/11, and therefore we propose some additions, particularly to the recommended decision by COP15 under the paragraph 7, i.e. in subparagraph 6, on national commitments, it should be added that such commitments are to be developed with the full and effective participation of IPLCs and relevant stakeholders, including youth and women. In subparagraph 8, on non-state actor participation, it should be added at the end that formal and informal consultation processes for indigenous peoples and local communities and relevant stakeholders, as well as accessible and transparent mechanisms to comment on national reports, could be put in place to secure full and effective participation of these groups in national reporting processes. In subparagraph 10, on the development and update of the NBSAPs, it should be added that this is to be done with the full and effective participation of IPLCs and relevant stakeholders, including youth and women. In paragraph 11, on peer review mechanisms, it should also be added that it is important to actively involve IPLCs and relevant stakeholders, including youth and women, in such reviewing processes. And finally, in subparagraph number 6, on monitoring, it should be mentioned that just as with socioeconomic issues, links should also be made with indigenous, gender, and age-related issues. We have attached concrete text proposals in the uploaded intervention. We hope parties will support them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth, and thank you also for being brief. Now I need advice from Secretariat. Do I have time for IPLC? Yeah. Okay, I do have time for IPLC, but please be brief because I need to conclude. IP, you had the floor. I see they are not connected. No, okay. Well, I'm very sorry, colleagues. Maybe if Secretariat, could I think I need to conclude. That's right, Secretariat? Yes. Okay. I do apologize to those who have not had time to speak. But dear colleagues, we have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on Agenda Item 9. We have had a very rich discussion and some suggestions. On many issues, I note major areas of convergence. However, we also have a range of views which require further discussion. I therefore propose to establish a contact group on this agenda item, and that the contact group have the following mandate. Based on the interventions heard during this session, as well as during the informal SBI sessions in February, the contact group will discuss key elements of the SBI recommendation on the enhanced planning, monitoring, reporting and review mechanism. A non-paper will be circulated 24 hours before the contact group meets as a basis for this discussion. The contact group will be chaired by Mr. Andrew Stott from UK and Ms. Gillian Guthrie from Jamaica. The contact group will hold its first meeting on Thursday, May 20 from 12 p.m. to 15 p.m. Montreal time. So, colleagues, it's 2 minutes left to 10. And we will reconvene. We need to stop for today, and we will reconvene SBI in plenary on Friday, May 28, and we will continue. We'll proceed with the first readings of agenda items 11 and 5 before taking up CRPs for agenda items 3, 4, 6, and 7 and 9 if possible. I also remind you that 3 contact groups have been established, and please look at the SBI page on the CBD webpage for timing and connection details. Before closing, I would like to remind all parties and observers that the survey on indicators initiated by the co-chairs of a contact group on item 3 under Substa, the deadline to complete the survey has been extended to Wednesday, May 19. On behalf of the Substa chair and the Secretariat, I would like to encourage all parties and observers that are not yet done so to complete the survey. The first plenary meeting of SBI-3 is now adjourned.